Hi, you're listening to the Authorised podcast. I'm Harry Reid, and thank you so much for watching. Before you do anything, make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell, and then jump down below to the description where you can find all of our links. Thank you. Robert, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, Victor?
I'm always good. I'm always good. Let's get into it. How did this all start?
It started in on Christmas Day of 2019. My wife and I watched a documentary about the life of Edward de Vere, and I thought I would fall asleep in it, and I didn't. He's the 17th Earl of Oxford. He's supposedly the guy who wrote the works of Shakespeare. So the documentary takes the viewer on a river trip through Italy and takes you to Venice, Verona, all these different places like that. And after that, it about a month later, I was having dinner with my son, and I mentioned or talked about this movie, and my wife kind of rolled her eyes. She was not a fan of the movie at all. She believes that Edward de Vere did not write the Shakespeare stuff, that William Shakespeare did. So we got into it kind of. So after that, I had to prove her wrong, kind of. So that's where it all started.
Yeah, see, so someone that doesn't fully understand Shakespeare, he didn't write his own stuff.
Correct.
And who
It was a pseudonym.
as a pseudonym. So who is this other guy then? Can we get into that?
Yeah, sure. His name was Edward de Vere, and he was the 17th Earl of Oxford.
Right.
And
How do we know this? How do we know that it wasn't the man that we all know as William Shakespeare?
yeah, and that's what everybody wants to know. Like, how do you know for sure? And so here's the thing: if you read through the works, one of the things that I noticed was a lot of fainting. Like, why is there so much fainting in the plays of Shakespeare? And I posed this question on Twitter to Sir Stanley Wells and um, another guy, Paul Edmondson or something like that. These are the like very top-notch scholars, and they told me that it had to do with bloody tragedy, poor ventilation, and uh, things like that. But the thing is that the fainting is found in his poetry. So it has to be more than just something that you see on stage. Now, during March 2020, the state of California was locked down like Blockbuster Video. So I was watching TV, and I heard I kept on seeing all these TV commercials for Latuda. So I got my cell phone and I just went to the website. What is Latuda? How much does it cost? Because there were so many commercials for it. And Latuda is a drug that treats bipolar disorder, and it costs $1,500 for a 30-day supply. And after that, I was on Twitter and I heard this famous actor, Sir Patrick Stewart, and he was reading a Shakespeare sonnet, and he was talking about all this, you know, depression and despair, wanting to kill himself, and I kind of joked, it sounds like old Shaky could have used some Latuda. And then I got to thinking, the fainting, that is a bipolar symptom. So is the talk of depression and despair and thoughts of suicide. We've all heard the famous Hamlet line, to be or not to be. That is the question. Right there, Hamlet is considering committing suicide. So thoughts of suicide are a bipolar disorder symptom. So when you add up the symptoms, you kind of get the person who really wrote the works was bipolar. That's my hypothesis. And if you look at Sir Francis Bacon, William Shakespeare, any other person did not suffer from bipolar disorder. The only person who did was the 17th Earl of Oxford, Edward de Vere.
Now, how did you find this particular man, and what linked you from his work to Shakespeare's?
And that's the thing. Like I said, I was watching this documentary
Yeah, but
on Christmas Day, and so I couldn't for some reason when you actually see like you I mean just imagine yourself on a boat and you're passing by this I don't know this castle, or it's not really a castle, but this is the town's edge. And in Italy, it was it kind of looked like a castle in a way. And there is a forest growing to the left of it, or to the north of it, of this town, and it's made of sycamore trees. And in Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet, he talks about the north side of the castle. There's a grove of sycamore trees. The trees are over 400 years old. Obviously, they're still there. And so when you see this stuff, it kind of little things kind of add up that the real author had to have gone there. Like when Shylock, he says, "I'll meet you on the Rialto." Now, the Rialto is a bridge, so it doesn't show up in any maps. It doesn't show up. Um, how would you know this place?
is it
And people say it could have been in a book or something.
is it not possible that Shakespeare conversed with someone else as he would as a man in high standing, and they conversed, and he went, oh, "I like that. I'm going to take that idea and use it." I do that with my own books. Book.
Yeah, that would make sense, except that Shakespeare is noted for composing over 900 words. I mean, bringing 900 words into the English language. Now, I speak Spanish, so like a word like bandito, you convert to bandit. That's the kind of thing that he did. He obviously knew Italian because he a lot of the words that he uses are Italian.
Right.
And a lot of the plays are set in Italy. So and then when you get these small little details that only someone who actually went to Italy would have known, you get a picture that the real author had to have gone to Italy. He had to. He had to speak Italian. He had to.
And
William Shakespeare.
is there no
It,
proof that Shakespeare never went to Italy?
yeah, because of the plague. You had to get a special permission from the Queen to leave the country. And William Shakespeare never did this. Edward de Vere did this. And that's how we know that he did go to Italy. I mean, it's obvious.
What year was the plague?
The plague was all over the place, but it was from like 1570 to, I mean, if we're talking Shakespeare's time, to 1640 at least. So it was intermittent.
Is it not possible that... So, did the plague come about after Shakespeare was born?
No, it was before. See, here's the other thing. People tell us that Shakespeare um, grew up in Stratford upon Avon, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I went to in America. There's a library called the Folger Library, where the guy that made Folger's coffee, he he has this huge collection of Shakespeare stuff, and he put it online, so you can actually go there and see stuff online. And that's kind of what I did. Is I just went online, and you could see there, like his father John Shakespeare, he he actually rented a farm, a 14-acre farm in 1570, and it shows two conveyances of property by by John Shakespeare to William Clopton. So if he's a tenant in a farm located 5 miles away, because it's located on Ingun Meadows and not Stratford upon Avon, and he's paying £8, which would be like $3,400 today, to rent out this farm. That's pretty big money. So it makes more sense for him to be, you know, out on this farm.
It does, but there are also contradicting stories of Shakespeare that had secret lovers and other sort of people that he would converse with on the outsides. One of those secret lovers is supposedly a male, which obviously for the time was very frowned upon. And so there are other ways. Like there are. Does it not make more sense that he wrote this? Because what was Shakespeare's earliest work? And what would someone have to
It's,
gain from composing 900 pieces of work under someone else's name?
well, you have to realize if someone is bipolar, there's a famous American author. His name is Kurt Vonnegut. And Kurt Vonnegut's mother suffered from bipolar disorder. In fact, she committed suicide on Mother's Day. Um, and Kurt Vonnegut's son also had bipolar disorder. So you have three people with bipolar disorder. Kurt Vonnegut said the only thing that saved him, or the best cure for bipolar disorder, was writing. So it kind of gives him a reason to write 1 million words as Shakespeare did. The question is, like you said, why would anyone just turn over their masterpieces to some commoner or to some average Joe? But the reason is that if you're mentally ill, have you ever heard the term paranoid schizophrenic?
Yeah.
A paranoid person would not want to be put under the microscope. In fact, that might be a trigger for an a greater kind of relapse or something. So they would prefer to have someone else do that part of the job, and as they are getting cured by the writing. So what's important for them is just doing the writing.
Yeah, but someone also with that amount of mental, not just illness, but weight, generally, I don't feel like they'd be thinking about putting it on someone else. For them, it would be but just about getting it out, no?
Well, I here's what I think. Bipolar disorder is one of those things where you want to be famous one day, and then the next day you don't want anybody to know that you're famous, or that you don't want any to be associated with it. So it's a bipolar kind of thing. One day he wants it, and then, or 1 week maybe he wants it, and the next week, forget about it. That's kind of how I think. And so I think he left these cryptic messages in his works to let people know later on. And that's what I think people are discovering now. So in other words, there are thousands of people who are in agreement, including Sigmund Freud, Mark Twain, Charlie Chaplin, and others.
And do we know what happened to this man later on in his life? Do you know if there was any other further clues later on, if he ever came out? Because, like, so the story of DB Cooper, there was a man 40 years later who walked into a bank or walked into a building and he said, I'm DB Cooper. And old and frail and dying. And he said, that was me. I did it. They took his facial, like, they took his photo, they drew him, and everything matched up. But he was so old and he was like, I did it. I did it. But later into his later years, like, how would you know? Like, what happened to this guy? Does that make sense?
Yes. What I think happened with, look, 60% of people who endure bipolar disorder attempt suicide. And I think what happened is that he committed suicide. And back then, suicide was a big disgrace. It was a mortal sin, and your property would actually, or the widow's property would actually become the king's property. So that would stop people from committing suicide. But in this case, I think that so Edward de Vere um, commits suicide in 1604, and William Shakespeare, and that's how he signed his name. He only had one E in his name, in other words. And Shakespeare had three names. So the pseudonym had three names, or three E's, and the real guy just had one E to his name. So I think he just enjoyed being the notoriety for being the playwright. He was part of the King's Men as some kind of actor. We really don't know what he did, There's no Yelp reviews for his acting. There's nothing that really talks about him being in any plays, So we just uh, we we just go along with the story. But I don't think that Edward de Vere's wife really wanted anyone to know that her husband committed suicide, because she would be out on the streets begging for food, and that's what happened to people whose spouses committed suicide.
Would there not be any? But would it be like that though? If her husband had wrote all this work for someone else, she would never be on out on the street, because there would be people close enough to want to provide, because they in turn had made his life. No.
Well, the way I look at it, um, the king back in those, like living in that society, was like a totalitarian regime kind of thing, where the king or queen was like a dictator, and they really ran the show. So you just didn't want to be on the bad side of the king. And if this guy wants to pretend to be, my husband, I think that's the way the widow probably looked at it, is like, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. Now, she passed away in 1609, and in her will, she wrote that the payments to continue to what she called my dumb man, Dombe, or silent man. So, in other words, there was a payment to a silent person.
So, do you want to say this? So there were what 16, 14 plays that were wrote after Vere's. How do I pronounce that? Sorry, De Vere's death. Do we know what those
Yeah,
16 plays were? 14. Sorry. Do we
well,
know?
that's again not true. We actually don't know when the plays were written. Now, I'll give you a good example. There was a woman who in the UK, her name was Victoria Lucas, and Victoria Lucas passed away in 1963, and we know this to be a fact because she committed suicide. Now, 10 years later, or roughly 10 years later, more like 7 years later, 1970, her book was published in the United States. And the name of the book was The Bell Jar. And it was published under Sylvia Plath because Victoria Lucas was her pseudonym. She was embarrassed about her poetry. She didn't feel like it was good enough. Interestingly, who won the Pulitzer Prize for poetry, which is the greatest prize for poetry in the United States, in 1982? Sylvia Plath. 19 years after his death in 1604, in 1623, the 36 plays of William Shakespeare with the three E's are collected and published. And that was 19 years after Edward de Vere's death. Now, think about it like this. Um, the first folio, where the collected plays, uh, are dedicated to two brothers, William Herbert and his brother Philip Herbert. And back then, normally plays or books were dedicated to King James the First, because if it wasn't, he could just shut it down, and so there was kind of a danger there of dedicating a book to someone who was not the king. But so who was Philip Herbert or William Herbert? It turns out that they were both had relationships with Edward de Vere's daughters. Susan de Vere was married to William Herbert. They had 8 children, and he was like a multimillionaire. So he could afford, if it's kind of like the old adage, happy wife, happy life. If she says, I want, my father's plays to be published, and 750 copies of the first folio were printed. And back then, that was serious money. It cost over 500,000, today, probably more, to do this. So who would just take, they say it was actually the two actors, Hemmings and Condell, that collected the plays and turned them over. But the thing is that the Globe Theater burned to the ground in 1613, and yet they collected these old quartos somehow. That doesn't make sense. But Edward de Vere had two secretaries on staff who probably just, made copies of all his plays, and upon his, you know, when his wife passed away in 1609, she gave the stuff to the daughters because in 1609 that's when the sonnets are then published. But I think there was some flack there about the name, and so they waited till the real, I mean, not the real, but the guy Shakespeare um, was dead, and then they went ahead and then they printed and published the first folio.
What year did Shakespeare die?
1616.
1616. So there is a chance that he, I mean, he was obviously he. There's not a chance that he published his own work. Is there any similarities between the work that was published before Vere's death and afterwards? Is the
No.
writing the same? The style is there
Well,
a drop in
have
quality?
let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen Shakespeare's signatures?
No, I haven't.
You should see them because you can Google it. And in my book, I tell you, don't believe me, just Google this stuff, and you will see how wild this stuff really looks. William Shakespeare could barely sign his name. I mean, he was most likely, or Shakespeare, um, he was probably illiterate. I mean, it's really sad the way it's very hard to believe that here was a man who never blotted one single line, using a quill. That's what his the two um, men, or the two actors, Hemming and Condell, claim in their writings.
What's the difference between the before and the after of the quality in the name, like in the signature? Is it a clear difference? Oh, there we go. So is that? Oh wow. So is that not just a side effect or a function of a high functioning brain, just so quick that he just wants to get it done and get it out? As a man that wrote 900, and how many pieces of work, is that not just a thing of just get it done? Like as people
I
do.
I don't. Well, again, the claim that Hemming and Condell wrote was that here was a man who never blotted a single line. And if you look at that, you would say it's barely legible.
Yeah.
So therefore, that cannot be true. Now, if you look at the signature of Edward de Vere, his is crystal clear, and he signs his name as Edward Oxenford because he was this wealthy, uh, rich royal. But actually, what happened is Edward de Vere, um, who passed away, like we said, in 1604, he got his money. He inherited his money He was born in 1550, and he got his money in 1571, roughly, let's say, $77 million worth. And do you know by 1581 he was out of money? He spent it all,
On what?
and that's I. Good question, but he blew his money, and that is a sign of bipolar disorder. One of the things, like a main, but like from his and the interesting thing about bipolar disorder is that the symptoms don't start um, manifesting in someone's life till they reach the age of like 21 through 25. And this is the time when people are studying Shakespeare, if you think about it. And therefore, that's why I want them to read my book to get another idea, not only of just Shakespeare, but Edward de Vere and the talk about bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
Back in the 1580s, the there was probably less than 1% of the people in England that had bipolar disorder. But did you know that currently worldwide it's almost 4% of the population? So it's increasing, and it seems to, and that's why we have all these commercials for Latuda. I mean, people have a better understanding of it now. But back in the 1580s, you know what they would do? There were two cures for bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. One was to beat someone. They felt it was like a demonic possession, so they would beat you up and then they would put you into a dark room.
Was the second one
And this
incarceration?
no, the second one they used a thing called mummy. So what mummy was, they would take these bodies from Egypt and smash them up and send them back to England, and apothecaries would sell the stuff as a cure for epilepsy, which epilepsy means fainting often without some kind of medical reason. So in Shakespeare, we find in three of the plays talk about mummy. Now, how would someone from Stratford upon Avon know about mummy? It's not like something common.
It's not common for someone who doesn't do their research, but for someone who is a notorious, well, genius, when you think about the effect that he had on the English language, it wouldn't be a stretch for him to go out and do his research, no?
But he had no, there was no public libraries.
But
You realize
yeah, but
there was no Google. There was no,
no, there was
there was
there was
no, there was no way. He was living on a. Let's get this straight. He's living on a farm in Ingon Meadow, 5 miles out of Stratford upon Avon, which is roughly 100 miles from London. Right now, for me, that's like from Los Angeles to San Diego. I mean, it's far. It's not. It was a 3-day journey by horse back in those days.
yeah.
Yet William Shakespeare or Shakespeare never wrote one single letter to anyone, not his wife, not his daughters, not any friends, and people say, well, he wrote plays with other playwrights. Well, if he did, wouldn't one of them keep one of his letters? I mean, if you were a friend of his, wouldn't you hope to get a letter? And wouldn't you save that, like, and pass it down through generations, that this is my letter from William Shakespeare? But over 400 years and no letters, not one, and only one letter sent to him, and it was just a letter asking for money.
There were no one else ever sent a letter to him.
Correct. Just one letter was sent to him.
You can't blame him for not sending a letter then.
No, we can blame him for not sending letters because his wife was illiterate. His daughters were illiterate.
So he wasn't
His
going to
wife,
write a letter to them. I wouldn't send a text to my partner if she couldn't read.
well, his one daughter could read. His daughter Susanna, the one that married Susanna Hall, she married the doctor. She could sign her name. So if he did send her a letter, why didn't she keep them? You know,
What were the?
she could have read them to her mother, and the thing. Look at the thing with Hamnet. Her twin brother died, or the her brother dies, or Hamnet dies in 1596. And what does William do? Is he so grief-stricken that he cannot write a play? No, he runs over and buys a coat of arms. Like less than like 65 days. That's where he's standing in line to get a coat of arms. It's crazy. So the two people do not add up. When you look at the the guy from Stratford upon Avon was not the genius that you think he was.
Maybe, but people in distress, do they not tend to write some of their best works? There's
If they're in despair,
yeah.
they would. Wouldn't they? They if you were living at that time, wouldn't you go to a Bible
I'm
if you were in despair
I'm not
and
religious.
depression? No, I'm saying that that back in that day, at that time period, that was like a source of comfort for most people, right?
Yeah, of course, but do we know if
And
Shakespeare?
a Bible was found from 1570, and it's underlined with, and they say that like some people, this is an argument that's ongoing, like between 60 to 80% of the things that are underlined are also found in the plays and sonnets. But on the front cover of the of this Bible, you know whose name is on it?
Go on.
Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. It's not William, and that's the thing that they. It's kind of like this. We've had this myth, and people, teachers especially, they want to encourage it because it's kind of like, you know, William was a boy genius from Stratford that he could write like this. Maybe you can too. This is like a message of inclusion. You know, everyone can be a genius kind of thing. But the thing was, there was no public libraries back then. And on the other hand, what I'm saying is the message needs to be adjusted for today's society, and that is that a man who suffered, and I hate to use the word suffered because it's like he was born um, with the mental illness, and he had to endure it through his entire life. It's not something that you can just get rid of, you know, or just take an aspirin. And so here's a guy who endured it, and he became the greatest writer in you know, the English language. He's still from England. You know, he's still your guy. It's not like I'm, you know, trying to steal him, but I'm just trying to point people in this direction and just say, look, don't believe me. Just do, you know, the research, and you'll see that what you've learned in school may not be correct.
Oh no, I'm not trying to disprove in any way. I just want to offer both sides of the coin. That's all. I want to be able to,
No, no, no.
yeah,
I
ask you a
understand.
question. So, like, if there were no public libraries, what was the main source of information at the time that people would pass? You know, how would
Private
things,
libraries.
private libraries?
You
So,
had to have a private one,
so a man of that
and
standing, would he not have access to a private library?
a man of a farmer. You're talking about. See, here's the thing. um, Remember how the reason that Stratfordians, or people who believe in the man from Stratford, want to keep him in Stratford is because of the learning of Latin. Most of the books back in that day were written in Latin or Greek, so there weren't that many books written in English. In fact, the there was a book called Metamorphosis by Virgil, and there was a version in Latin, and there was a man named William Golding who translated it into English. And I'm sorry, Arthur Golding. And Arthur Golding's version was the most popular in England. And Arthur Golding lived with Edward de Vere in this mansion called Cecil House. William Cecil was the Baron Burleigh, and he was connected with Queen Elizabeth. He was her Secretary of State, basically. So they had the best or the finest library in the world. So Edward de Vere only had to probably, you know, walk down a flight of stairs, pick up a book, and, you know, his uncle is there. And I believe that he probably translated the, you know, Ovid for his uncle, and did it for him and gave him all the credit. That's kind of how he rolled. He didn't want any credit for himself.
I understand. In doing all this research, did you find any like? I mean, obviously, you know you've clearly done your research, but did you find any solid proof that there might be that this might be true?
Well, I sent it to several psychiatrists because the thing with bipolar disorder, um, there's no test for it. In other words, you can't, unlike the COVID-19, you can't stick a swab under someone's nose and, you know, trace the antibodies kind of thing, or there's no MRI, no blood test. That's the weird thing about um, a mood disorder. You have to ask the person, how did you feel yesterday? You know, that kind of thing. For were you in a good mood or a bad mood? And the person can say, yeah, I was in a good mood. And then, you know, your wife tells the doctor, well, yeah, he punched this guy in the face, and the doctor will say, were you in a good mood? Yeah, I punched, it made me happy. So, what the person says may not always be true, but and that's what some people have argued and said this is all speculation. You can't really, know that this person had bipolar disorder. He's got to stand in front of a doctor, and he died over 400 years ago. But I'm not going to have, prescribe any medication for him. I mean, that's you know, the thing is that we're just like piecing together, like the symptom is spending a lot of money all at once, having reckless sex, having all these symptoms, and then all of a sudden, matching it up with this person. That's what they did with with Sylvia Plath. As I said, she died in 1963, and people today will say, yeah, she had bipolar disorder. So did Hemingway. So there are a lot of brilliant people. If you actually connect um, this disorder to creativity, there's a huge connection. So it's not unusual.
No,
But I don't think that we like to, say that our heroes have, cracks in their statues.
I think times are changing. I think people know. I mean, some of the best minds from all over are broken minds. I'm not like some of the like if you look at any rock star from the 70s or the 80s, they're not normal people. Like the amount of stuff Ozzy Osbourne took is enough to kill a football team, right? Like
Yes.
like we look at people like Eminem, you look at his like backstory and that's crazy. People don't make it out of those situations, like
And
there's
that's
yeah, there's a link between what people go through and what they create, right? Because it's a desire and a dream. Most comedians are broken people because there's a desire through maybe a mutual unhappiness or some deep rooted issue that they have to make other people happy, maybe because they're not happy internally.
well, here's the thing. Edward de Vere, his father died when he was okay. Edward de Vere, at age 4, was sent to live with another family because his father was Protestant and he was concerned that Catholics might kill his son. So he sent him to live with this scholar, Thomas Smith, who believed that children, it was easier for them to learn Greek first and then Latin. So at age 4, he was learning Greek, Latin, Spanish, Italian, French, and English, that kind of thing. So he attended Cambridge when he was at age 9. Now, in Cambridge, they complained because he would break the windows of his dorm room. And if you think about it, if the punishment for fainting or exhibiting bipolar disorder is beating someone and putting them in a dark room, what might he do to let in the light?
Yeah,
What
no.
if he, does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. I
And
think it's a fascinating insight. It's amazing how you've pieced all these pieces together. Have you had any feedback from the community that is passionate about Shakespeare themselves?
yes, I have. And it's it's interesting because a lot of people, what they do is they won't say anything. They don't. The people that are truly passionate, they ignore it. They do not want this known for some reason. I have no, you know, to me, if you want to, if Stratford is your man, that's fine with me. I don't care. All I'm trying to do is say, yeah, times have changed, and I think you should look at this guy because to me, um, the someone who was 12, his father died, and his mother remarried, so he was brought from Oxford to live with at Queen Elizabeth's royal court. So he never really um, knew a mother's love. And if you look through the sonnet. And what I do is there's a website you can go to. It's called well, I give that website in my book, but um, it this guys these two guys put together a website where you can just put in a word and it will show you how many times it's used. So, like the word forgive um, in the sonnets, how many times would you say the word forgive is used?
No idea.
Or any number from, 1 to 100.
90.
It was used once. Forgive once. Okay, so the word love, how many times the word love from 0 to 500?
So, okay, so 40.
270 times. So just in the sonnets, 270 times. It seems like he had this compulsion about love. And it makes sense if your mother died and you never really understood a mother's love. That is, to me, it's like a psychological thing that I'm that's where the path that I'm going in my book is that there's kind of like like a road with two, a fork in it, and people have always gone to the right or the left, and they've gone down this path to change, see the sexual thing or his politics or you know what he ate and all these different things like that. And where I'm more interested in is the road less traveled, and that's the psychic or psychiatric one where the shades are all drawn and it's hard to get into, but because this is what's usually talked to between a patient and his or her doctor, their feelings, their moodiness and things like that that don't really you really have to look through the cracks to find it, and that's what my book does. And also I received an email a couple days ago that said my book was shortlisted for some prize. Now some award. Actually, what it said is that you're one of several. I don't know how many, and I thought it could be a spoof or something, but they didn't ask for any money, and they said it's going to be a Zoom meeting on June 24th. So I don't know if this is true or not. So I'm just sharing it.
No, just roll with it. If there's ever anything like that comes up, just jump straight in. There's nothing negative to be gained from that because if the worst happens, you're in it, you're still in it, and that's still something. Like if it is a big scam and everyone finds out, you can be like, I was in that and buy my book. Like,
Well, the psychiatrist told me that, and this, I had sent it out to these psychiatrists, and one wrote back to me and said, "You are the first person in 400 years to advance this claim that Edward de Vere was bipolar, and with that, linking it to the works of Shakespeare." So it's kind of like a something that's never been done. So it's not, it's unique, and I'm not really selling it for a lot of money. It's like $3.50 on Kindle, so it's not not looking to make money on it. I sell a house, I make much more money doing that. So it's just a fun little thing, and yet people who have read it have actually liked it, and uh, the reaction from the other people who have read it that apparently they just don't say anything. It's kind of like it's weird. It's like dropping a stone in a pond and not hearing a sound. Kind of.
no, I mean it sounds great that you've. I always love it when you can look at something from a different perspective, twist it, and then make these links because you are coming from a different perspective. Whether you're right or wrong, I'm not saying either. I love the fact that you are coming from a different area. It makes it much more interesting. Whereas everyone else just looks at the one thing. I think it's great. Where can people find your books?
You can find it on Amazon. It's called Shakeys Madness. Here's what the cover looks like. I don't know if you can see
Oh,
that,
that's
but
that's awesome. Who did the cover for you?
oh, I did it myself actually.
Oh,
I
you did
just
that.
found a cartoon image that was free, so just put it together. Um, and yeah, well here I've written other books, but they were into kind of like romance. I've got, I was just having fun doing like telling stories, and one of them, I get like 15 hits a day on Facebook, or it's called "Is She the One?" And people have really liked that. But I don't really want to be known as a romance writer. I don't like to be like tied into something. So I was trying to expand a little bit.
No, absolutely. I think the most fun thing about writing is the opportunity that whatever you create is your world, so you can make it what it is. And if one book wants to be about Shakespeare and then you want to do 15 about love and then something else, that's up to you. Like that's the best thing about this, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. And yeah, when I was in college, I tell this story in this book that I was taking a Shakespeare class, and I had to write a paper about Sonnet 116, which was my instructor's favorite sonnet, and that's the one that goes, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds, admit impediments." And I thought the sonnet sucked, and so I rewrote it and I submitted it in my paper, and so I tell that story in the book too. So.
Can you re can you read out the rewriting to us?
I want to give that as a hook for someone to check out the book, and maybe they'll go to that page and just read that or something.
No, absolutely. I'm intrigued. You'll have to tell me off air. But
But
I I am fascinated to read it myself and get a better understanding of where you're coming from. I think it sounds absolutely amazing. What we'll do is we'll drop the links below as well, so anyone that watches can jump straight in and find it for themselves. So you're not doing this for money. What's the main goal for this book?
the main goal is to raise awareness for bipolar disorder, because as I see it, it's like a silent epidemic that's happening, and I even started to wonder if that, what we call FOMO, the fear of missing out online, if that has anything to do with it, because we're also crazily obsessed with our cell phones, if that is causing, if there's a consequence to that, and if bipolar disorder is somehow linked. I'm not sure what causes bipolar disorder, but it's on the rise. And to me, it's kind of scary because, um, a lot of crimes and just a lot of unhappy people that are just wandering the earth these days. But here in Los Angeles, I see them all the time. People that are, pushing a shopping cart and mumbling to themselves. That's part of it.
To be fair, in Los Angeles, that's probably someone just trying to like work their lines for a pilot or something. No, like you're in the city where everyone wants to be somebody, right?
Oh
Which
yeah,
in turn, sorry, must mean you're probably going to get high levels of, you're going to get high highs and super low lows, right? Because that's the city where everybody wants to be, the next big thing, and there's 1,000 people for one audition. Like the depression and the mental illness that comes from the stress and the anxiety, everything else that's all balled up into one coming from that sort of area. It's a completely different animal.
that could be. But worldwide, if you look at the numbers, bipolar disorder around the world is increasing, not just here in LA.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I physically see it. Yes. So I'm thinking that, well, perhaps if this book could be used along with the other textbooks of Shakespeare, I call it Shakespeare because the Earl's name was,
Yeah.
Edward de Vere. So why not study Shakespeare? You study this guy from Stratford and study the guy from the Oxford, and just talk about both, and then also talk about bipolar disorder. And I think that just knowing the symptoms would be helpful for college students and just society in general. I think just becoming more aware.
No, absolutely. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I can't wait to read the book myself. Th-
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for taking the time to jump on. I really hope I get a chance to talk to you again. Would you like to tell everyone where they can find you?
Yeah, my website is robertboog.com, Also, I've written some songs, so if you're ever now, I don't sing. My wife tells me that I sound like a drunk Bob Dylan who's still insisting he's okay to drive, kind of thing. So,
To be fair,
um,
Bob Dylan sounded like a drunk Bob Dylan most of the time. I don't want to
yeah,
be the guy that puts
right,
that out online, but yeah.
yeah. So, other people sing them. I just write the lyrics, and they're professional musicians that play. But yeah, you can find those on YouTube. So just to it's a creative outlet, keeps me out of bars, that kind of thing. So do a little scribbling, and you can find my books on Amazon, robertboog.com thing, and nice chatting with you, Victor.
No, awesome. It's been absolutely amazing chatting with you as well. I'm intrigued. I'm gonna have to. I feel like I need to do a much more deep dive, and then we need to chat again once I have, because I feel massively underprepared for something. I'm like, oh, I thought I knew little bits. Apparently, I know next to nothing. So once I've done my research, we'll get back into it. I can't wait.
Sounds great.
Thank
Sounds
you.
like a plan.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And you can find me on Twitter at Mr. King Reardon. All my links down below. Like, comment, but before you comment, make sure you just take a second, relax, think about what you're going to say, then post it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Goodbye.